Welcome to Eternal Family Adoptions, where members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints share stories and secrets of building forever families through faith-centered adoptions. I'm Donna Pope. Join us as we discuss how our faith can guide our adoption journey and create family connections. I love the Utah Adoption Act, and I say that in a funny way because I do. I love it. Because the intent behind the legislature is to balance the rights and the needs of all the parties, specifically the birth mother, the adoptive family, the child, and the birth father. Can you address how Utah balances the rights of those four parties?
Well, they provide options to each of those based on their position or circumstances. A biological mother, a birth mother, has certain rights, and her consent and the relinquishment of her parental rights is treated differently and handled differently as the mother than they are as the father or as a guardian or as a grandparent or whatever. And so the laws relate to her differently than others. So they're individualized based on the circumstances. In under the law, if you're married, if you're a husband that's married to a woman who becomes pregnant, the law says we believe the husband is the father. It's called a presumption of paternity, and he's a legal father. Now, he may not be the biological father. There might have been a different biological father, but if she's married, that man she's married to has certain rights until that presumption that he's not the father is overcome, or that he is the father, overcome and defeated. He has certain rights to notice and consent and things like that. An unmarried biological father is treated differently. And that person, that unmarried biological father, the legislature has a system and a program or a process in place where that unmarried biological father is put on notice when he's with a woman and a pregnancy can result that he could be the father of a child. And it's the policy and the legislative intent of our state and our legislature that unmarried biological father has to do certain things to demonstrate that he wants to be a father, and that he's willing to step up and to take responsibility and to accept the legal responsibilities that come with being a father, and demonstrate that in order to be able to stop an adoption, object to an adoption, assert his own rights, and get visitation and custody and things like that. And he has the responsibility to step up and do some things. And so each person, the legislature has created this statute in the Adoption Act. It pertains to adoptions, but it really boils out into custody and visitation and child support and relinquishment of parental rights and termination of parental rights and a lot of other areas of the law. But this one, for purposes of adoption, the Adoption Act says, here's what each person involved. If you're a professional, here's what you have to do to give notice. If they're entitled to notice, you have to get their consent. If their consent is required, here are the things you have to do with each person separately. And that's the way it's laid out.
And one of the things that I love about it is it comes with the attitude that we want permanency for the child. We want the child to have stability as much as possible. We also want the birth mother recognizing that she's faced with a very difficult decision to have her rights and her responsibilities honored as much as possible. And we also recognize that the adoptive family, once they take a child into their home, they have a certain right, you could say, to believe that adoption will remain, and that they can love that child and stay committed to that child. And this balance, to me, is just really sweet. Have you seen that it works pretty well?
The focus throughout, I see throughout the law in Utah and the case law and the Court of Appeals and Supreme Court when they interpret statutes, and the judges that implement them. But obviously, the focus is always on the best interests of the child, and what is the best interests of the child, and we want that stability and protection and safety as much as possible. That's balanced, though, with inherent and constitutional protections and rights of parenthood, and parental rights are important, and they're cherished and protected. There's strong protections in Utah for parental rights, and so our legislature has balanced those as best they can through the statutes in terms of how we're going to balance and do that, to where the parents' rights are respected, but there are ways that if the child needs different situations and scenarios and stability, that if the appropriate statutory provisions are met and circumstances, then adoption might be the best option, or a permanent guardianship might be the best circumstance if we don't want to terminate the parental rights. So there's a lot of different things in play that are all being balanced, but at the end of the day, I do think it's the intent of the legislature to provide safe, strong, connected two-parent homes for the best interests of the children whenever that's possible.
No, I do too. There's been some criticism towards Utah about maybe helping birth mothers too much, which seems a little bizarre to me as someone who cares deeply about birth mothers, that you can help them too much. But the concept is, if you help them too much, it manipulates or coerces them to doing something that they wouldn't otherwise do. Do you want to address that?
I think what you might be referring to in terms of helping them too much, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in under the law, a couple that's adopting is allowed to help a birth mother with certain financial expenses through the adoption process, through the pregnancy, and for a short period of time after the placement of the child. And I think Utah's laws, I don't think it's disputed, Utah's laws in terms of what types of assistance and categories of adoption expenses that can be given to a birth parent is very broad, and it's not limited. It's not capped. It just says they have to be reasonable adoption related expenses. Well, that is viewed by folks from the outside as being an encouragement to use that to entice birth parents to come do their adoption in Utah, because we can give you more in expenses than you can get in X state or Y state or Z state, who has a cap of $1,100 for the whole thing, or only 2 months of adoption expenses or whatever. And so because of that broad nature of our law here in Utah that allows for that assistance, I think that puts everybody involved in adoptions, agencies, professionals, social workers, birth parents, couples, everybody involved, in a position where we have to be careful how we do that, so that it's done ethically and properly, and it's not being that law that Utah has of a broad expenses is not being taken advantage of for the purpose of making money, or having expenses paid that may not be necessary or real or whatever, that more people come to Utah because they can get more money. That's the perception I think is leading to a bad reputation for Utah adoption providers and the Utah adoption community. And I think that's a large part of the issue, is that perception based on the ability to provide expenses that are not capped or not narrowly tailored.
Right. And so, how would you advise birth mothers who actually have these genuine needs? They need housing, they need medical support, they need counseling, they need their utilities, they need their phone paid. How would you
They
advise
have to
them?
take time off work while they're in their last
They do.
trimester.
They've got to get this support. how would you advise them? And we don't ever, there's a statute that says not selling a baby. And they don't, birth mothers do not want to feel like they have sold a baby. They don't want to feel like their integrity is being questioned either, or their intentions are being questioned. What advice would you give both the birth mothers as well as professionals working with them in this?
To birth parents that are receiving the expenses and that help, two things that I would encourage them to keep in mind. Number one, to keep in mind that the money that they're receiving, those expenses that they're getting help with, that's not coming from the agency. That's coming from the couple that's adopting their baby. It's like it's coming from this young 25-year-old couple that are just trying to build a family. It's not coming from, this endless pot of money. That's one thing. Number two is I think that they need to understand that if I'm going to be given help with these expenses, I need to be willing to show them the need. I need to be able to demonstrate this need and that it's real, because unfortunately, because of fraud in this industry, and deception and cons that happen, there's some distrust. And so I hope that they would be educated and counseled to say, look, don't be offended that we're asking you to share your lease agreement on your apartment so that we can verify how much your rent is. Don't be offended that we're asking, to see your utilities for the last 3 months or whatever, to know what it's going to be for the next 3 months. Or, that sometimes is viewed when there's those questions, at least in my practice, when I ask for those kind of verifications, there's almost an offense that why don't you just trust what I say? And why don't you, I'm telling you what my needs are, and you should just accept those numbers and not do anything about it. And I would like to see more education and more training, or more help that for them to understand, look, it's not that we don't trust you, it's that we need to verify to protect the couple, to protect our adoption industry from these bad situations of fraud and deception that are making this becoming a bigger and bigger problem. In the last 20 years, the amount of expenses and fraud and has just skyrocketed, and it's caused competition between agencies. It's caused fighting and competition over who can promise more in birth parent expenses to try to get that birth mother to come here and place with this couple rather than the other. And we don't want to have a competition and a bidding war for these placements in these babies, because then we're losing the entire purpose of why we're doing adoptions. It's not to see how much money we can get and expenses paid. It's what's the right place for this baby, and along the way of that being the goal, but along the way we need to make sure we take care of these birth parents that are doing this incredible thing. But we need to take care of them honestly and consistent with what their real needs are. And so how do we figure out what their real needs for expenses are without offending them or making them get defensive? I don't know the answer to that, but that seems to me to be an issue that if we could resolve that, where there's better honesty and communication, and take out the competition to where different professionals are competing to try to get this birth mother to place with them, and the need to offer more and more, then I think we could really go a long ways in resolving this problem. And it's not just a problem in Utah, it's across the country. But because of Utah's unique law on birth parent expenses, I think we end up taking a bad rap in Utah, because a lot of birth parents choose to come place here because they can get more help with expenses than they can in other states.
And what I see coming up down the road, as I look down the road, I see that that might increase, that this need for additional support and help uh, may increase. And so we want to make sure that we can provide that support and help, um, because it's needed.
Yeah, but you
That
also have to play counter a little bit. You also have to take into the account, but that these couples just can't keep increasing the price of the adoptions. I mean, I've seen my first $100,000 adoption cross my desk. I cannot believe that we're getting to six figures to adopt a baby. We can't
Did
keep.
that include medical and
Yeah, it's
legal too?
everything. It's everything together. Agency expenses and birth parent expenses over a long pregnancy and medical bills and everything all together. But we can't, it's not sustainable to continue increasing the expenses, because instead of having a $20,000 adoption, we're having 50, 60, 70. And if you're saying that you see in the future that that's going to increase, well, the only place you have to get those expenses is from your couples, because you're not funding that as an agency, and facilitators and lawyers are not funding that money. And so everybody wants to take care of the birth mother and provide her with everything she needs at somebody else's expense, right? And so it's not the couple that's making those decisions, it's the professionals that are making the decisions with the couple's money. And I'm sensitive to that, and you know that for years we've talked about these issues here in Utah, and you know that that's something that I'm sort of passionate and sensitive about, is protecting the couples and the costs of these adoptions, that because it's not possible for most couples to spend 40, 50, $60,000 to adopt. How do they have four kids if they're going to have to spend $250,000 to build a family, to then spend millions raising those kids, right? So
no, and kids are expensive. No, I totally agree. And one of the challenges, or one of the blessings that came with LDS Family Services, is that the church subsidized those adoptions. And that in and of itself became somewhat not feasible for the church to do it anymore. And so it leaves many members of the church who want to adopt in a position. I can't afford 100,000. I can't even afford 40,000. I can't afford. How am I supposed to afford to do that? You're absolutely right.
and
And
I
so,
get that question all the time. And here I'll give you the 30-second answer that I tell them. If you can find your own match and find your own baby, you can do an adoption. If it's in state, call me. I do dozens and dozens of adoptions every year for less than $10,000. If you can find your own connection, putting it out on social media, tell your friends and family, somebody's neighbors, cousins, young men's president is going to know somebody that gets pregnant or whatever. And they're going to say, hey, I know this couple that's looking. And those are the connections I do all the time. That's the vast majority of adoptions, I think, in Utah are happening because of direct connections. And those adoptions are not all of them are $10,000 adoptions, certainly, but many of them are. I would say most of them are less than $15,000 for everything: home studies, social work, medical expenses, birth parent expenses, things like that. Some are way more than that, because the birth parent expenses are more than that. But my point is, I tell them, don't get discouraged if you can't afford to go with an agency or go with a situation that's presented to you that has high expenses with it, and don't give up on adoption. Please don't. Anybody out there listening, there are ways to adopt without $50,000 in the bank, and don't give up, and there are ways to do it.
so again, it's back to this balance. And Nathan, you jump right in here. It's back to this balance in the same way that the legal balance is between the adoptive family, the birth mother, the birth father, the child, the need for the balance there. We have balancing their rights. we're also needing to balance the needs. And the needs are sometimes birth mothers have genuine, real needs that need to be met. And adoptive families have the need to not, get in over their head in trying to do it. Ultimately, we're trying to make sure that this child gets into a good home and that there is an open relationship or some type of relationship for him. So it's a balance all the way
It
around.
for sure is.
Nathan,
And
you're
I'll just say one thing, and then I would love to hear from Nathan too. I, I've sort of spent 10 minutes here, and it probably sounds like I'm degrading or down or bashing agencies and the costs and expenses of using an agency. I refer to agencies all the time, and I have couples that call me and say we've been saving for um, infertility treatments. We decided to use our money on adoption. We've got X amount in the bank, and we don't want to put ourselves out on Facebook, and I don't want to go hand out cards at the grocery store, and I don't want to market myself. I'm a private person, and I say, here are a list of 3 great agencies, and there is a place and a time, and I refer to them, I support them, I love them. So I don't want to. I have strong opinions about the cost of adoptions overall, as you know very well. But I certainly do not mean to say there's not a valuable place for agencies. Nathan, jump in.
Yeah, I wish adoption was affordable for the school teacher and for the police officer. And, there's a lot of people that just can't afford what a modern domestic infant adoption costs today. On the other side, I've worked with a lot of agencies and law centers and over the years, and I've seen budgets and what they spend, and they have to spend $15,000 to get an adoption opportunity through the door, 15,000 of advertising to get it in. And they may have to spend $10,000 on birth mother expenses, or 8,000, and they may have to spend, there's just so many expenses, the legal expenses, and then they get sued by a birth father. And and I've seen over the years several adoption agencies that have started up, and they say, we want to help the police officer and the school teacher be able to adopt. We want to do adoptions for $25,000 or $30,000. And they open, and they get a lot of adopted families that sign up with them, and they take money. And it's, that supply and demand thing, right? When the cost is low, you sign a lot up, but then they don't have enough money to advertise to find enough adoptions, and they don't have enough money to provide good legal services, and they end up cutting corners, and and then they're stuck with all of these families and no more marketing budget. They've already taken the money, and they've kind of stole the hopes and the dreams of those families. And um, I would love to do that. I would want to start that kind of agency and do that. But I actually think those agencies do a disservice to the adoption community. You look at Independent Adoption Center, that went out of business, and how many families that have paid money and they were left with their adoption dreams destroyed, all that time they waited, and then they were left with nothing. And we've got, I guess the theme of this show is balance, right? We've got to find that balance. We still have to be able to do a good job. If we're going to be an adoption professional, we're going to take somebody's money, we got to be able to find them an adoption opportunity and have enough money to do that, to run those Google ads, right? And we've got to have enough money to hire great adoption attorneys like you that are going to not cut corners and do a good job, so that the adoption will stay intact, and will really terminate all the rights of everybody that needs to be. And we need to make sure we really have enough money to cover all of those birth mother expenses and medical expenses, and can take good care of her. And I don't know, it's sad that it's that expensive. And we've got to find that balance of doing a good job, but um, not being mercenary on price, right? We need to not overcharge, but we need to charge enough that nobody's dreams are destroyed, and we can really provide a great service to those people. And it's difficult to find those balances.
So I go back to because this, I think, was one of the major struggles that the LDS Church had in trying to decide how to do LDS adoption services. And I think that they concluded, because part of the problem was that the demographics in a birth mother changed during those years. It was no longer the 16-year-old who got in trouble in the backseat of her car that was needing to place her adoption. The average age of a birth mother right now is 27 years old, and nearly 90% of them already have other children. And they're not living with their parents. They're trying to make it on their own. And so their needs are more. And that was a challenge. How do you help meet those needs and still keep the costs down?
What I would have loved to see happen in that family with in that situation with LDS Family Services, I think if they would have increased their prices, right? If they would have brought their price, whatever a fair market price was, if they would have brought it up to a fair market price, they could have afforded to provide more support for the birth mother with the existing children. They could have, which they just didn't have a budget to do. They could have afforded to do advertising to bring more birth mothers in the door, where fewer birth moms were going to bishops and they needed to, find more adoption situations. I think a lot of the problems could have been solved if they would have charged something close to a fair market rate. And I know that never would have happened, but I don't think they had to go out of business. I don't think they had to close. I think sometimes we think we're doing a good job by charging a very small amount for an adoption service, but the reality was it wasn't sustainable. And even the church with all their resources couldn't continue to sustain it at that level.
Yeah, I don't know. You might know more than I do, but I'm not sure that the subsidy issue was the primary factor in why they ended up deciding to close down the program. I think it had more to do with the spiritual and program purpose reasons than it did.
The global reach of the church. Yeah, there were a lot of other reasons.
But those are good points.
Well, just final on that, one of the things that I was told, and I buy into this totally, that it's not in the mission of the church to subsidize middle-class families to do an adoption. The mission of the church is redeeming the dead, teaching the gospel, providing, and this just didn't fall in the mission of the church. But that means that people who want to adopt, that are LDS, now have to make some really tough decisions. Do I pay this higher price to get this agency and work with this agency? Do I try to find somebody on my own, like you're recommending, Derek? What do I do to be able to adopt?
I always say there's basically four ways to adopt. You can do a private adoption and market yourself. You can go through an agency that will find your birth mother and your baby for you. You can try if there's anywhere left to adopt internationally. You can explore that route. That's shrinking fast.
Not many.
Number 4, which we don't talk about a lot or haven't talked about today, which is foster care and adoption through foster care. And there's a lot of ways to build a family through foster care. And the focus, obviously, of our discussion's been on infant adoptions and domestic infant adoptions, but foster care can be a really fulfilling and beautiful way to build a family, and even result in an infant placement and adoption as well. And so those are the main areas and ways. But lastly, I'll just tell you, a lot of adoptions that I'm doing now, are grandparents that are adopting their grandchildren because they've got children in crisis and addicted to drugs or alcohol, and they're babysitting and taking care of their grandkids. And I don't have statistics, but the numbers of those adoptions that I've done has skyrocketed in the last 10 to 15 years. And the number of older children being adopted by grandparents or other family members is a growing area, that we, sort of off topic from the issues we've been discussing today, but it's certainly an area of adoption that's happening. widely and commonly.
No, I appreciate you bringing that up because you're right. It is skyrocketing. Um, we just interviewed a family that they had adopted internationally 20 children. And these were all really hard to place children. Severe no fingers or toes, severe brain damage, a lot of mental problems. And they had opened up their heart in such a way that they were open to taking on those situations. Now, after having raised these children, they now are parenting a grandchild. And so we see, because the challenges of raising children right now is that it leads many times to drugs and other problems that then the children come back into your home as well. So, how would you advise adoptive families who are wanting to build bring children into their home through whatever means? How would you advise them to prepare?
And before we go there, let me throw a couple statistics in. You were asking about statistics. Grandparent children, grandparents raising grandchildren today in the United States is 2.5 million. And you're talking about foster adoption, how many kids are in foster care. There's more than 400,000 kids in foster care in the United States today, and 118,000 of them are legally free and clear to be adopted.
And how does that compare to infant adoption? Or we know it compares to international because there's not.
Domestic infant is about 20 to 25,000
So
usually.
kinship adoption is over 1 million.
Well, that's not kinship adoption. That's children being raised by their grandparents. There isn't a good statistic on how many of those grandparents then adopt the child.
Thank you, Nathan. That's really interesting. I think that shows that there are areas where, well, there are opportunities and places and areas where families can look to adopt if they're open and willing to adopt beyond a newborn or young infant adoption. They can build lots of different ways to build a family, for sure. But, you know, when you're in your 20s and you're just married and you're starting out and you can't have kids, everybody wants to have the baby, right? And so it's not, it's totally understandable. And I was in that same position 20 years ago myself. So how to prepare, I think education and learning was really important. I tell couples to read and to work with a social worker that's experienced in adoption and go to classes that are offered by agencies and social workers on adoption and learn about ways to adopt, learn about what it means to adopt in terms of relationships with birth parents and open adoptions. Just get educated. And you can get a home study done and you can get educated and you can study. These are all things you can do while you're waiting to be selected with an agency or while you're out marketing yourself and waiting for your own match. You can educate yourself and get your home study finished and prepared. And those are the things that I encourage people to do in order to prepare so that you understand some of the specific dynamics and peculiar issues that come up with adoption that don't come up in parenting a biological child.
No, and we could spend a whole nother hour on that. I'll touch on it from a personal point of view for you. Here you are, this immensely successful lawyer, and you're becoming a judge. And sometimes we want those same desires and dreams for our children. And sometimes they go a different direction. How has that been for you?
I'm proud of my kids. I've had no issues of disappointment with my kids whatsoever. I think that parents need to be more understanding and knowledgeable and empathetic of kids that are growing up in today's world and the world they live in, circumstances they're facing and the challenges they're facing, and be patient and understanding and supportive in whatever direction their kids want to go, and loving your kids through everything they go through is the most important thing that you can do as a parent, in my opinion. And if you love them and support them and help them through it, and even when you disagree with the path they're taking, or you think they could do more, or you think they should do something different, that's okay. That's okay. Just still love them through it, and make sure they know that you're a fan as a parent and that you still support them in whatever they decide to do. And I'm not the expert at it. If you ask my kids, they'll tell you that I'm not, but I hope my kids would tell you that they know that I love them at the end of the day, and that no matter what they do, that I will be there helping them and supporting them and loving them no matter what. And I think that that's the number one most important thing.
I totally agree. I totally agree. Nathan, do you have any final thoughts?
Donna, you just asked a great question about what does an adoptive family need to know to get this right. And Derek gave a great answer. And I would add one small piece to that is I think those adoptive families need to find a mentor. They need to find someone like Derek and his wife that have been there and done that, and let someone kind of hold their hand through this process.
And what we're trying to do with this podcast is just that very thing. We hope for people coming on and hearing Derek's story, and he shared information. Our most important part is for his experience as an adoptive father, for him, what that meant to him, and how he went through that. He's so amazing because he understands the law, not just the law, but also the nuances of the law and the perspectives of the law. And he shared that with us as well. Take just a minute, Derek, to talk about the faith that you have that you've needed to be both a father as well as a lawyer. Tell us about how faith has worked into that.
I think my faith component is centered around the idea that the family is fundamental and is the source of our happiness. It's the source of a lot of our struggle, but is mainly the source of our happiness in this life, but for the eternities. And understanding and knowing the importance of a family in the big picture and the eternal perspective helps me to want to be an adoption lawyer, because I want to have a small part of this eternal process. I don't invite myself to my clients' sealings in the temple, but if I feel it's appropriate and I'm connected and close enough to my clients, I'll strongly hint that I would love to go. I wait to see if there's an invitation. But those that I have been privileged to attend and get to be at, that's the finalization of an adoption that I love to be a part of. And I'm happy to sit back in the corner and share a chair with somebody in the temple and not take a space of family members or whatever. But if I could just be a fly on the wall and watch your sealing, that's meaningful to me. And that's the goal that I'm shooting for those families that are of that faith, and getting through the court process is required in order for them to be able to go be sealed in the temple. And so I understand what my role is as an adoption attorney. It's to help them get through where they need to get so that they can then go get sealed in the temple. And I consider that an honor and a privilege to help them with that little tiny step in a really much bigger eternal objective to build an eternal family. And I've been grateful to be able to do that for 22 years now, and I'm grateful to you and thank you for the kind things you've said about me and my work and what I've done. And I hope that there's families out there that are stronger and happier and better. And I'm glad that I got to be a little small part in there. their family building.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us. We've dealt with some challenging issues, which we always are dealing with some challenging issues. Nathan, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I want to echo what he said on adoption sealings in temples. There's some pretty special, sacred things that happen in temples that are pretty amazing. But honestly, of any ordinance that I've been able to be part of, adoption sealings are absolutely my favorite. There's just such a special spirit that is there, and you're right. That's the kind of the pinnacle of what we do in our careers, is those few times that we're able to be there and be part of that happening.
My last little story is that I was able to go, and it was a really difficult situation, and they asked me to hold the baby. And it was an amazing experience, and so that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. And so, thank you for for coming and being on our show. And anything we can do to help you at any time, we want to do that. We want to do it. Thank you for joining this episode of Eternal Family Adoptions. I'm Donna Pope. Every child deserves not just a home, but a forever family rooted in love and faith. So visit our website, eternalfamilyadoptions.com, to access faith-based adoption resources and sign up for a newsletter. And join us next time as we continue this journey together.